Well, good morning, church. How are we doing this morning? I hope you're doing well. Didn't Brent and the team do a fantastic job of leading us before the throne this morning? Absolutely. We're grateful that he's able to be here with us and worship alongside us this morning. I'm grateful that you are here with us as well. If you don't know me, my name's Elliot. I'm the associate minister here at the Cove, and I'm thrilled to be here with you, whether you're with us in the room right now or whether you're joining us live on the stream. I'm excited to continue this conversation that we began last week around this idea that we're stretched way too thin, and this is not how God designed us to live our lives. And last week, we talked about this idea of energy management and fillers and drainers, and we said that we serve an infinite God, but that we're finite, which means that God can do it all. He can do everything, but you can't. You need to rest, and that's okay, because you can rest in Him. We said that we were going to take the next 4 weeks to talk about some spiritual disciplines that we can put into place in our lives so that we can start living within this rhythm that God created for the universe and live in a way that is sustainable and brings glory to God. So we're going to dive into that today, the first of which being silence and solitude. But before we get too far into that, I want to ask you a question. You remember getting in trouble as a little kid? No, but your siblings did, right? Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Whenever I would get in trouble as a kid, the first step was always the same. It was go to your room. That was step one. And I knew what that meant. It didn't mean go in your room and play with your toys. It didn't mean go to your room and listen to music. It didn't mean go to your room and have a good time. What it meant was go to your room, sit on your bed, and think about all of the reasons that you're sorry for whatever it is that you just did and await the impending doom that is inevitably coming. That's what it meant. And when Dad shows up to dish out whatever punishment is getting ready to come down, you better not be having a good time. But if I'm honest with you, maybe you experience this too. Very often, the waiting was the hardest part of the whole thing, wasn't it? Sitting alone in the quiet and just anticipating what was coming was almost as hard, if not harder, than what eventually came. You remember getting grounded as a kid, and you weren't allowed to go to the party, you weren't allowed to hang out with your friends, you weren't allowed to do anything, you had to go to your room, sit on your bed, and be by yourself. And I read somewhere the other day that our childhood punishments have now become our adult dreams. And I'm like, that sounds right. That sounds right. And a couple of weeks ago, Abby and the kids went to her mom's house for a few days, and I had to work, so I stayed home, so I was at home by myself. And I went almost 24 hours without seeing another human being. And I have to tell you, it was as glorious as it sounds. It was. I can tell my introvert friends and my friends with little kids, because there's tears in your eyes right now. You're going, where do I sign up for that? Yeah, it was pretty great. But if I can be honest with you, it got awkward a lot sooner than we want to admit, a lot sooner than I want to tell you. And you know why? It's because we don't have very much silence or solitude in our lives, do we? And I don't know if that's because we associate it with the punishments from our childhood or whatever the reason. We feel the need to just fill our lives with this noise all the time. And I know this is true because I know this about you. You remember the last time you walked into a store or a restaurant or something and there wasn't background music, don't you? The reason you remember is because whoever you were with, or maybe it was you, one of you turned to the other and said, it's creepy in here, right? We remember these things, and we know, like even in the movies that we watch, when it gets quiet, nothing good happens next, right? When the soundtrack goes to nothing, something real bad's about to happen, isn't it? And we've conditioned ourselves to think that silence is bad, but what if we're wrong? What if it's the noise that's doing us more harm than good? What if the noise is poisoning our relationships, not only with each other, but also our relationship with God? And I've been working with students for a long time now, and I find myself just saying the same thing over and over again, because as much as things change, they really don't change that much, do they? And so I'll find young men come to me and say, you think I should ask her out? And I'll say, well, is she chasing after God? Is Have you talked to her parents? Are they going to kill you if you do? Like, what's the deal? And we'll get to that, and I say, okay, that's fine. Go ahead and ask her out. But if I find out that your first date is to a movie, I will hunt you down. And I'll talk to the ladies, and they'll say, do you think I should go out with him? I'll run through the same thing. Is your mom and dad going to kill him? Is he chasing after Jesus? All this kind of thing. I'll say, listen to me. If he asks you out and you want to go, say yeah. But if that first date is to a movie, tell him no. Or tell him try again. Why? Because what's the first date designed to do? It's designed to get to know one another and to decide, are we going to keep going down this road that we've started on? And if you're going to a place where you either can't talk to each other because it's too loud or you're not supposed to talk to each other, you have missed the point of what is happening right now. Because the truth is, if you want to build a relationship with somebody, you have to turn down the noise. But we're uncomfortable with silence, aren't we? Which is why we feel the need to fill the space between us with noise all the time. But the truth of the matter is, that noise is creating more problems than we care to admit. And if you've been a Christian for a little while, most of us would say that we want to hear from God. We want to grow closer in our relationship. We want to hear from him, but we're looking to hear from God in these big, grand, loud moments. And that would be incredible. And when it happens, it's amazing. But what if God's been waiting for us in the stillness and in the silence the whole time? Which really wouldn't be that weird, would it? Because that's kind of how he's operated from the very beginning, isn't it? You remember Elijah is a very famous prophet of God from the Old Testament. He famously defeated the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel, called down fire from heaven. It was a big, loud, amazing scene. The victory was complete. He was riding high, at least until Jezebel, who was the queen, said, that was cute and all, but now I'm going to kill you. And then all of a sudden his world flipped upside down real quick, didn't it? And he took off and he's hiding. He goes in hiding in this cave and he asks God to kill him. Assisted suicide with God. He says, God, just kill me now. And God says, no, I don't think I'm going to do that. Let's chat for a minute. And here's what happened in 1 Kings. It says this. The Lord said, go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by. Then a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord wasn't in the wind. And after the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord wasn't in the earthquake. And after the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord wasn't in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. And when Elijah heard it, he pulled his cloak over his face and went out and stood at the mouth of the cave. You see, God met Elijah in the still and in the calm. And it wasn't until it was still and it was calm that he heard that whisper of God and the restoration of his strength and the restoration of his soul began. But we see this not just with Elijah. We see this throughout the Bible, perhaps most notably with Jesus. Do you remember the first thing that happened after Jesus' baptism? I mean, after the dove descended and the voice from on high said, this is my son whom I love, and him I am well pleased. After all that, it says, immediately, Jesus was led by the Spirit where? Out into the wilderness, to the desert, to the desolate place. And what did he do? He spent the next 40 days fasting and praying. He was out there alone. He was tempted while he was there too, you may remember. Has it ever struck you as odd that the very first thing Jesus did, I mean, he's God, so he knows he's got 3 years to do all this. He spends the first 40 days, it's not an awareness campaign. There's no recruitment, there's no fundraising. What's he do? The first 40 days, he goes out and spends alone. And this is a pattern, not just then, but throughout the life of Jesus. Whenever something big is about to go down, you'll notice right before, Jesus pulls back and spends time alone with God. Did you know before Jesus picked the 12 apostles, he pulled an all-nighter alone with God? And who could forget, in the Garden of Gethsemane, right before Jesus gave his life for you and for me, what happened? He brought the apostles to the garden, and then he said, you sit here, I'm going to go over here by myself, and I'm going to pray. See, Jesus had this pattern of silence and solitude, not just in his life, but he encouraged it in his followers as well. In Mark chapter 6, the apostles, they're coming back to Jesus. He has sent them out by pairs to go and to preach and teach and heal and cast out demons and all this stuff. And they're coming back to Jesus now, and they're exhausted. I want you to pay attention to what Jesus says to them. Here's what it says in Mark chapter 6. It says, the apostles gathered around Jesus and reported to him all they had done and taught. Then, because so many people were coming and going that they did not even have a chance to eat, he said to them, this is Jesus speaking, come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest. I want to give you John Mark Comer's translation of this passage of Scripture from his book, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, which I highly recommend, by the way. And if you want to dive deeper into the spiritual disciplines that we're going to talk about over this week and the next 3, check this book out because we'll go a lot further into that. But here's what he says. He says this, what you really need isn't a beer or a night out at the movies. What you really need is time alone with me. But to do that, we need to get away from all the noise and all the people. Now, admittedly, this didn't really happen right away because the people saw Jesus get in the boat with the 12 and start going across, and they chased him down. They chased him around, and they got there, and they were waiting for him. They got this huge crowd when they got off the boat. And sometimes it feels like when we're trying to get away from the crowds and all the noise and all this stuff, it hunts us down, doesn't it? But Jesus didn't ignore the people. Like we said last week, he had time for them. He didn't ignore them. Instead, 5 loaves, 2 fish later, 5,000 were fed. And Jesus circles right back around to this idea. Because he says to his apostles, here's what it says. It says, immediately, Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to Bethsaida, while he dismissed the crowd. And after leaving them, he went up on a mountainside to pray. Later that night, the boat was in the middle of the lake, so the apostles were alone, and Jesus, was alone on land. So we see Jesus not only practicing silence and solitude himself, but instilling this into the lives of those who would follow him as well. Why? What's the big deal? Well, Jesus understood something about silence and solitude that we very often overlook, and it's this. Solitude isn't a place of punishment. It's a place of power. And silence gives us the opportunity to turn down the volume in our lives so that we can hear the voice of God. But so often we have this flip, and we view silence as punishment, and when we view it as punishment, we tend to run from it rather than to it. But the problem is when you run from silence, you run into trouble, don't you? And as a follower of Jesus, I want to encourage you to spend time working on mastering 2 kinds of silence in your life. External and internal. We're going to work from outside in, and then we'll get to solitude in a second. But this external silence, I want to start there because we can control that. Because you really can turn the TV off. You really can put the phone in airplane mode or turn it off. You really can turn the music down. You really can drop the kids off somewhere for a few hours. And if that's not an option for you right now, give us a call. We'll help you figure that out, okay? We really can turn down the external noise in our life if we choose to do so. But most of us choose not to do so because we know that when we turn down this external noise, what we're going to be left with is this internal noise, and we don't know what to do with the internal noise, so we keep the external loud so that we can be numbed and distracted by that and not have to deal with what's on the inside. Because this internal noise that we've got is this constant loop of anxiety, this constant loop of our frustrations and our fantasies and our fears and our hurts and our habits and our hang-ups, and we don't know what to do with that. We don't know how to fix that. And if I can just be honest with you this morning, you can't fix it. But God can. Our Father can. And when you hand it to him, that's where you're going to find this internal silence. But in order to hand it to him, you're going to have to get alone with him. And this is why silence and solitude go hand in hand. Henry Nouwen said that without solitude, it's virtually impossible to live a spiritual life. And he went further and said, we don't take the spiritual life seriously if we don't set aside some time to be with God and listen to him. And maybe that's hard to hear. Maybe you want to push back against that idea. And there's two reasons that we want to push back against that. One is we're not doing it, and we don't like to be told that we're not taking our spirituality seriously because we're not doing something. The other reason is this. So many of us equate solitude and isolation, and they're two very different things. They're two very different things. Again, to borrow from John Mark Comer, he says this. He says, solitude is engagement. Isolation is escape. Solitude is safety. Isolation is danger. Solitude is how you open yourself up to God. Isolation is painting a target on your back for the tempter. And it's interesting because so often we equate the two. They couldn't be more different. And the solitude that we're talking about today, when we're talking about this, we're not talking about even being alone. Because the purpose of the solitude that we're talking about this morning is we want to be alone with God. Just like Elijah and just like Jesus. But why? Why is that such a big deal? Like, we could just skip it, right? No. We can't skip it. And here's the reason. The foundation of any loving relationship is time, is it not? The foundation of any loving relationship is time. I don't care if you're talking about a significant other, a spouse, kids, family, friends. It doesn't matter. Your relationship with God. The foundation of any loving relationship is time. And if you want a thriving relationship, you are going to have to learn to spend time alone with them. You can't get away from that. And, you can choose not to do this. You can choose to skip the silence and solitude and be like, Elliot, I'll come back next week. We'll try the next one. This one's not for me. And that's okay. You can do that if you want to, but I'll just tell you now, spoiler alert, if you don't like this one, you ain't going to like the rest of them either, okay? You can choose not to do this. But I'm here to tell you that you will reap the rewards of the choice that you make. And over time, when we choose to keep our lives loud, it wears on us, doesn't it? And over time, we begin to feel distant from God, from ourselves, and from other people. We start to have this undercurrent of anxiety in our lives. And you turn to your vice of choice, and I don't know what that is for you. Maybe it's wine, maybe it's porn, maybe it's TV, maybe it's social, maybe it's cars. I don't know what it is for you. You know what it is for you, though. Temptation becomes harder to resist. Anger begins to flare up easily. We're frustrated a lot easier, and emotional unhealth begins to set in. Is it sounding familiar? Maybe that's where you find yourself right here and right now. And I came here to tell you there's a way back. There is hope for you. There is healing for you. There is restoration for your soul in the presence of God. Get away. Spend some time in silence and solitude, because if you do, you'll reap the rewards of that. And over time, you'll begin to feel again. And here's the thing, I'm not going to lie to you, it's going to be hard, especially at first, because of what we talked about a few minutes ago. You're going to have to deal with all that good and the bad and the ugly inside your own heart. All of this internal noise, you're going to have to hand that to God. You're going to have to face it. And it's not going to be easy, but here's the thing. When you hand it to God, you're handing it to the one who can actually do something about it, who can actually heal it. He can take it from you rather than numb you to it. There's a big, big difference. And in that place of silence and solitude, you'll begin to hear the voice of God speak words of life and hope and love and healing and restoration over you. What you'll find is that silence and solitude are places of peace and of power. And in those places, you'll find freedom and you'll find the life God has always intended for you. So, what are we going to do? We're going to make our quiet places our go-to rather than the first to go. There's a big difference. And for most of us, it's the other way around, isn't it? Because when we get busy, the very first thing to go is our time with Jesus, isn't it? And then we can't figure out why we're so stressed out, why we're so anxious, why we're so worried, why we're so frustrated. Well, can we not figure it out? Because I think that we probably can. Let's make our quiet places our go-to rather than the first to go. Let's reject busy as a badge of honor. Let's replace busy with present. And in that quiet place, you'll learn to be present. Present with God, present with yourself, present with others, maybe for the first time. And if I recall correctly, Jesus came and gave his life for you and for me so that we could have the opportunity to be present with God. Did he not? That's why he came. Because the sin in our lives had broken that relationship and removed the possibility of us being present with our Father. And Jesus came and gave his life for you and for me to fix that, not only here on this earth, but for all eternity. That's why he came. And if you have any questions about what I just said, I would love to chat with you about that. If you're with us in the room here in just a little bit when service is over, I'm going to be right down here in this corner. I'd love to chat with you. If you're with us on the stream right now, you can email us at hello@swisscovechristian.com, and I pray that you will. But maybe you've been a Christian for a little while now, and you've just been kind of neglecting this silence and solitude. And I came here today to ask you, to beg you not to skip this. Do not settle for a surface relationship with your Father. Dive deep. Seek silence. Seek solitude. And in that place, you'll hear the voice of God. You'll find that healing and that hope that you've been looking for. Seek silence, seek solitude, and allow your Father to restore your soul. Let's pray together.